membership funds to assist Hope College students every year. Where we are today is due to the decisions and innovative ideas made by past members and leaders of this organization. Perhaps at the time, they were not thinking about sustainability as we view it, but certainly sustaining HASP as a lifelong learning organization was a primary goal. Thank you to approximately 760 of you who have renewed your membership for this year. We are pleased that so many of you want to continue engaging in HASP at this time, even though we will be continuing to meet remotely. Membership and course fees, participation in programs and activities, and your contributions all help HASP remain in a good financial position. The present leaders of HASP are especially grateful for your generous response to our recent fundraising campaign, which was designated to rebuild our Facilities Endowment Fund. All the above help us to remain faithful to the goal of meeting our present needs without compromising the ability for HASP to meet needs in the future. It also seems that innovation is a component of sustainability as we continue to make decisions that will create better and more efficient ways of living and learning together. If ever innovation has been needed, it has been during this COVID pandemic. We want to congratulate our committees for implementing new ideas and ways of operating through this unusual time. They have had to think outside the box as they've planned our meetings, curriculum, and activities. And many well-deserved thank yous go to Kim and to Susan for not only being innovative, but dedicated to the continuation of HASP programs during the pandemic. Now, I want you to please be watching for an innovative special event which is being planned for later this fall. The Special Events Committee is also looking ahead to next spring and summer with the hope that some of the planned events that had to be canceled this year will be rescheduled in 2021. Your response to the Service Committee's opportunities to meet with Hope students in a variety of classes was also amazing. Even though these sessions will be remote interactions, we know that your participation will be a positive experience. Thank you to all who have volunteered, and thank you to Maura Reynolds, Service Chairperson, and Elliot Tanis, who have facilitated this part of our service opportunities. As you all know, online registration for the fall term is available on our website now. Please follow the directions sent to you with the fall term course catalog, and should you need further assistance, please email Kim or Susan. You can also call them at the office on either a Tuesday or Thursday when they will be working there. And now, Carla Verscure, Chairperson of Membership, will introduce today's guests. Carla?
Thank you, Barbara, and good morning, HASP members. It's wonderful to see so many of you this morning, even if it is from quite a distance. We have no new members to welcome today, but we do have some guests that I would like to give a special HASP welcome to. So join me in welcoming Marie Santander Wolfson, Deborah and Joe Salinas, and Lori Goshorn. We're glad you could join us this morning, even though it is virtually, and we look forward to a day when possibly we can meet you in person. Enjoy your time with us this morning, and welcome.
Thank you, Carla.
And we certainly do look forward to when we can meet and greet some of our newish members and our guests at every meeting. Now, Director Kim Mendels will share a few instructions with us regarding this morning's presentation, and Gary Bogle, member of the monthly program committee, will introduce the morning speaker after Kim gives us some directions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Barbara. Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. I just want to give a couple quick tips for this morning's presentation. The first thing is to make note that you are all muted when you enter the virtual classroom. Please keep yourself muted during Travis's presentation so that we don't have a lot of background noise and distraction. Also, if you plan to be getting up and down a lot or doing something else while you're listening, we ask you to turn your camera off so that we're not disturbed by that. However, if you're going to fully tune in to the presentation, then we do love to see everyone's face. Second, if you would like to have a better experience in terms of engaging with the presentation this morning, we recommend that you set your computer screen to speaker view. So if you hover at the controls, for me it's towards the top of my screen, you can see gallery view or speaker view. If you click on speaker view, that will allow you to always see the person who's speaking in your main screen, which is best for this type of presentation so that you can see Travis and focus on him and on the slides that he will share. Lastly, Travis is going to give his presentation and we will take questions at the end. I'm going to ask you to chat, use the chat option to ask your questions. And I'm going to ask you to click on that and you will see an option to either put your question out to everyone or to chat your question directly to me. I'm asking you to choose that option, to click on HASP Virtual Classroom so that the questions come directly to me. That way, if there's multiple questions of the same type or whatever, I can direct those to Travis the last 10 or 15 minutes of the presentation. So I think that's all. Gary, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce Travis this morning.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Travis Williams is the CEO of the ODC Network. The ODC Network is a nonprofit outdoor education and conservation organization that is comprised of 10 business divisions that facilitate the organization's work connecting people, land, and nature. During his 20 years as a business leader, he has developed a diverse resume in business development, nonprofit management, strategic planning, and mergers and partnerships. Some of his many accomplishments include developing 2 Greenway projects, launching Project Clarity, creating Little Hawk's Discovery Preschool, and the development of an ecotourism business. Mr. Williams' greatest accomplishment was developing the Outdoor Discovery Center, which has grown from an idea on paper to a regional resource with 45 employees serving over 100,000 people annually. Travis serves as advisor and board member for numerous local and national organizations. He's been recognized around the country for his accomplishments, and he's thrilled to be with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Travis Williams.
Thank you, Gary. I appreciate that. I am going to share my screen now, so you should be able to see my screen. And one thing I actually am going to recommend too is if you don't need your video on, if you shut your video off in the bottom left corner, it will lessen the bandwidth usage, and it may actually improve the quality of the presentation overall. So I'm going to open this up now. Oh, whoops, need to do one thing quick, and that's get us back to the beginning. All right. So as Gary shared, I am the CEO of the ODC Network, and all the little entities you see on the screen are sub-entities of the ODC Network. They're business divisions we have. And they're really focused in two areas. If you look at that graphic, the right-hand side of the screen has kind of green backgrounds. Those are all of our education efforts. And on the left side, there's kind of blue backgrounds, and those are all of our conservation efforts. And we really focus as an organization on preserving and protecting our natural resources, as well as educating and connecting people to those. So this topic that I'm going to share with you today is really, it's not one that I would want to tell you I'm a great expert at. I'm not going to sit here today and profess to be a climate scientist. And my focus is not to actually give you all kinds of scientific facts, but actually share some of my own experiences and shared learning that I've had through my many travels around the world, as well as kind of bringing it back home here to our community. And what I really want to focus on today is the words that we use when we talk about this topic. Because if you've spent any time watching the news or reading any of the news, whenever climate comes up, it tends to become this adversarial topic that people get on to, either side of the spectrum on. And it often appears to have really no middle ground. And I'm going to really address that today, I hope, in sharing with you my thoughts on that and how we really should be having this conversation. When you look at your screen, you see a lot of words right now. And for some people, some of those words may be a polarizing statement. Some people don't like to hear things like climate change or global warming. But when you really start to dive into the sustainability world and you start to look at really what's going on across the spectrum, we see much more diverse set of topics that need to be considered when you're having this climate conversation. And that's from food production and agricultural impacts to biodiversity decline to natural disasters, flooding, sea level rising. There's so many things that go into this climate conversation. And so you can easily see how for some people that is a very emotional topic to talk about. And for some people who maybe aren't experiencing it, it seems like something that's not real. And we need to really be careful about how we have this conversation. So today I'm going to have the conversation with you in a way that I hope illustrates my view on it. And I want to be clear that it is my perspective. And again, that I'm not a climatologist or some climate specialist, but I'm somebody who's had a few experiences in my life. And I believe that communication is one of the most important things we can do. It's communicate well. And this topic needs to be communicated a lot better than what it's been communicated over the years. Because words really matter when you talk about things. And I'm going to just start by telling you that this is not a political issue. What I'm about to share with you today is an issue that affects every single one of us, may affect us in different ways, but it affects every single one of us. And we need to start to look at this from a perspective that includes all of us as human beings and not looking at it from a political perspective of which how this impacts one particular group of people or another. And so again, words really matter. And so as I walk through this presentation with you, I want that to be in the back of your mind. How do we communicate and how do we talk about this issue as we go forward in the days, weeks, months to come? So first though, I'm going to throw some facts out there to you. So what the numbers tell us is going on around our world. And then my goal is to actually show you a whole bunch of pictures and kind of bring you from a global view down to a local view of what climate issues look like, as well as I want to give some ideas of things that we can do and how we can address this. When we look at kind of global issues, we see that, in the world today, in May 2020, we actually reached, we are at a point where we had the highest level of carbon in our atmosphere. And this graph kind of shows that to you. So for all of time has been able to be evaluated, we see that the CO2 in the air and the atmosphere has moved up and down. But starting about 1950 or so, and that coincides a lot with our human development and some of the industrial stuff that began to happen in our world, we have seen an increase to the point where we're again at the highest level we've ever been. If you look at that on a more recent time scale from 2005 to 2020 in about a 15-year period, you can see again how much our atmospheric carbon has increased. And this is facts. These are numbers that have been recorded. It's recorded in a variety of different ways, and it's just something that we need to understand. At the same time, we're seeing this happen. So this graph is actually showing you temperature over a period of time taken by 5 different analyses or different systems that record it. And what we're seeing is that over the last 5 years, really to boil it down, over the last 6 years, we have seen the 5 warmest years ever recorded. And that is something that is obviously, when you see it once, you may say, okay, it was an anomaly. You see it twice, maybe it's an anomaly. So we've had 5 of the 6 hottest years on record have occurred in the last 6 years. And so we are continuing to see this kind of trend going on. That is information that we need to just be aware of. And then anybody who lives anywhere around our coastlines of the world, really, but the United States, maybe is a little more familiar with this than others. Those who live on Lake Michigan are getting their own freshwater version of it, but we also are seeing sea level rise. And this is something that's been happening for a significant period of time as well. And what you see on this graph on the left is that there's been three really different ways that we've recorded it over time. So it's acknowledging that. But what we're seeing is this progressing trend, and they're projecting, we know it's risen about 6.5 inches since 1950, but they're projecting over the next roughly 80 years that it could go up at least anywhere from another foot to 4 feet. And in worst case scenario, as much as 6 feet. And that's all, done with scientific, mathematical calculations. It is an estimate of what could happen, but it is, using the same scientific data and trends that we've been seeing. This increase in sea level has caused an average of 233% increase in tidal flooding. So there's something called king tides that happen, and it's a larger tide that happens in the cycle of tides coming in. And when these happen, we're seeing, places flood that never flooded before now. And so this definitely is another area that we just have to recognize. And then the last kind of factual piece that I want to share with you to set a little bit of tone in my presentation, I took this picture in Ecuador a few years ago. This is the Amazon rainforest in the country of Ecuador. And they are harvesting the forest and clear cutting the forest for various reasons, wood production, oil and gas, and development. But what we have learned and come to know is that the removal of our forest is really accounting for probably about 11% of our global greenhouse emissions. What that means is that by removing these trees, we are removing these plants that sequester carbon and literally act as filters for our atmosphere. And when we begin to cut those out, they have a lasting impact that is being seen, everywhere right now. Tropical forests are incredibly effective at mitigating climate change, and we really only look at that as about 3% of our solutions for addressing it. And I want you to remember that number. Only about 3% of our solutions to climate change have to do with actually improving the environment and the ecosystem. So many of them have to do with trying to change certain practices as human beings, which is not a bad thing. But again, we're only using about 3% of our funding to address things like forestation. So as you think about those kind of facts, that's what kind of drives our mindset, that we're seeing all of these changes in our environment. I would like to kind of share with you from my personal experience, globally, regionally, and locally, what this change looks like. I've traveled the world quite a bit. As Gary shared in my bio, we run ODC Explorer Network and offer eco tours around the world, and I've been privileged to get to travel quite a bit and see many unique places on our planet. And I have photos and I have evidence of these kind of changes happening firsthand, and I'd like to share those with you, and then I would like to spend more time talking about how we talk about it as well. So, but before I jump into that, I want to really share with you how important it is to make sure we're having the right conversation as we go through these. This graphic is interesting to me. It was produced by GreenBiz, but it was really talking about how you talk about specific topics. In this case, it was climate change, and how people react to it. So if you look at the bar graphs, the green are Democrats, yellow is independents, and red are Republicans. And there's terms across that are labeled in the yellow of each one of those. And then there's this emotional intensity index that's on the left, and 0 is low and 5 is high. And you can see when they were presented with different words, you elicit different emotions from people. And I share this only because I think how we tend to go about talking about topics like climate change, if you just pick up the newspaper and read it, you see words that are shared just simply to elicit an emotion. That tends to be how journalism works. And I think that actually can be very damaging to issues like climate change, where we need universal engagement and solutions. To use partisan type language is really damaging. And hopefully as I go through this, you'll see my point and can understand how I think we should change the way we view and discuss these kind of things. So from a global view, I'm going to share a lot of pictures here and just kind of move quickly through some things with you. But from a global view, I've had some really interesting experiences. I don't know how many of you are world travelers, and maybe you'll recognize this place. This is actually part of Ecuador. This is the Galapagos Islands. It's located about 600 miles west of mainland Ecuador in the Pacific Ocean. I've been privileged to lead multiple adult groups to this location, as well as several Hope College May term classes. I have a very dear friend who is a professional naturalist and guide in this country, and I've had a lot of great experiences going there. But this place is, because it's located directly on the equator, is actually illustrating some of the major effects from climate change. So when you go to the Galapagos, one of the great things about it is you can see wildlife up close. And these are just some of the pictures I've taken. I'm kind of an amateur photographer, and I love to go there because wildlife is so abundant. But the real thing that I want to share with you is when we look at what El Niño events look like going on and how it's impacting the country of Ecuador, in particular the Galapagos Islands, is very significant. So just quickly to point out, this is located right on the equator. You can see the dashed equator line running kind of across the top of the screen, and there's some faded out larger arrows coming in from the bottom and the right-hand side and top of the screen. The Galapagos is so unique because all these currents converge in this one location, and it seasonally gets bathed in really cold Antarctic waters that have upwellings, bringing lots of nutrients to the area. And it's really dependent upon these different temperature waters moving in and out of the area, because those cold nutrient-rich waters are what brings a lot of the life to the Galapagos Islands and makes it really unique. When El Niño events happen, what we have started to see, this is a graph showing how it's occurred over the last 100 years or so. There's a shifting of patterns that's happening. So it used to always be that El Niños would start in a moderate Eastern Pacific area. So they would actually be a little bit closer to like South America and Central America, where they would start, and then they'd move inland from there. What we've started to see happen now is that there's a very large warming pool of water in kind of Central Pacific, and that warming pool of water is where these El Niños are originating, which means the Galapagos Islands is getting even more negatively impacted by it. And what that happens is, if you travel to the Galapagos, you'll get to see scenes like this. And these are marine iguanas. They're an endemic species. They only live in the Galapagos Islands, and they actually are aquatic. So here they're all hauled out on the lava rock, sunning themselves, because they spend most of their time when feeding down in the bottom of the ocean bed eating algae, just like the green sea turtles you also can see in this image. And that when those currents get messed up by the El Niño, these green algae blooms actually don't happen. The growth isn't there. And the impending result that has become more and more frequent in the Galapagos Islands is we see the iguanas looking like this. So if you look closely at this guy, I took this picture, I think it was 2017, pretty emaciated. You can see the bones even through the tail and everything there. This is what happens to them when there's not enough food for them to eat. And eventually you can see this. And I've gone in years when there's been a lot of death and a lot of iguanas just kind of laying everywhere like this instead of being alive like that picture I showed you a little bit ago. These are absolutely the byproduct of these climatic changes that are happening. We also see this in other species. So this is actually a green sea turtle track in the sand, and they pull themselves up. If you look at the image, kind of the far right of your screen would be above tide line, and they will come up there and they lay eggs, like you can see the one doing on the right-hand side of the screen. And the young are born, and then they go back into the ocean, and that's where how their life cycle works. But when they come up on the sand, they dig a hole, as you see that turtle is done, and they drop their eggs in. It's really interesting, but sea turtles, green sea turtles in particular, the males, if the eggs incubate at about 82 degrees Fahrenheit, they're more likely to be a male. And if the eggs incubate at about 88 degrees Fahrenheit, they're more likely to be a female. So the eggs get piled up in the hole, and as you can imagine, the deeper you dig down, the cooler the sand gets. And the temperature can obviously affect how well that heating penetrates into the sand as well. And what started to happen is they found, researchers in Galapagos are finding that there's significantly more females being born because the temperatures have been increasing, and the average temperature in the sand is increasing to the point where it's affecting the number of males that are actually being born. And when you get an imbalance in the population ecology like that, it messes up the mating and messes up the offspring production. So these are just two kind of interesting examples of how that's affected the Galapagos Islands that I've experienced over the last few years. This is another one that is really interesting. So this is Usini National Wildlife Refuge or National Park. It's in the Napo region of Ecuador. So I was on a platform up in the rainforest canopy taking photos and looking at birds when I took this picture. So this is located at several hundred meters high, about 600 meters elevation. The sea level would be at this part, the ground level would be. This picture I took at Cloud Forest, which is about 2,000 meter elevation on the eastern slopes of the Andes. And this picture I took is in a really unique habitat. It's about a little over 4,000 meter elevation. It's called Paramo. So this is what above tree line looks like along the equator. So it's kind of tropical, alpine. And these areas are really unique, and they actually attract very specific organisms that feed on specific plants or utilize specific flowers. And in particular, there's a series of different hummingbirds that my friend Roberto, who's the professional guide and an avid birder there, has shared some data with me that they're used to always find specific hummingbirds at specific elevations because of certain food sources and things that they needed were at that elevation. With climate change along the equator, they're seeing a much more drastic change in this, more drastic than we see here in Michigan. And as the temperatures are changing, plant species are moving. And so these organisms are having to move to keep up with their food sources. And they're seeing a lot of that with hummingbirds. And this diagram actually is really, I don't expect you to read it, don't necessarily try, but it gives you a good figurative look at what happens when climate does change. So on the left-hand side, you see stressors. In the middle two, you see increases or decreased responses, or the far right side is kind of no response. And when you look at things like temperature increase, precipitation increase, global climate change overall, you can see a multitude of different responses that happen in organisms. And one of them is it forces them to have to find new food sources or move their entire habitat they live in order to keep up with it. And in some situations, organisms are not able to move fast enough to keep up with the changing of the ecosystem. And that actually starts to lead to biodiversity issues and species loss. And so this is something that you can see firsthand if you've been to Ecuador. There's a lot of stories that if you even Google it, you'll see there's a ton of information on this, but there's some pretty dramatic impacts that are happening along these equatorial countries. I also want to shift a second and just share a little bit about Alaska with you, because this is a place that I've also really enjoyed. So this is this picture here is Denali. So this is our largest mountain in the United States, a little over 20,000 feet. I've led a lot of trips there, hiking, kayaking, going on glaciers. Denali National Park is located in the south central part of Alaska, and it is a really unique ecosystem, and it's home to a lot of kind of iconic animals that a lot of people flock to see, and there's a lot of changes that are happening in this same region right now. So I was privileged to just a little over a year and a half ago go and flew on an airplane up to Denali, up to the mountain, to base camp. And as you fly up, you see these massive glaciers, and there's absolutely snow and ice, and you can see it. And I think a lot of times people say, see, there's snow and ice, there's nothing happening there. But there is. So what you see, the little dots in the snow there, are actually tents, and that's base camp for Denali, the people climbing Denali. You can see it here as well. You can see little tents down there. I was actually up there with my group, landed in an airplane up there, got to stand up there. And I also, on that same trip, was able to visit a friend of mine, Courtney, who actually works for Earth Song Lodge, and she's a musher, a dog sledder. Courtney's in this picture here. They actually do a lot of their business is mushing, getting people to Denali. Sometimes you take the plane like we did, but a lot of times the planes can't fly there because it's fogged in, there's snowstorms, different things happen, the winds are too abrupt. So they actually rely on dog sledding to get most of their supplies up into the Denali base camp. And interestingly enough, for 3 years running in Alaska, winter has ended for them at the end of February, or the first part of March. Traditionally, it would have lasted into May. And so they're starting to see their entire business, their economic system there. This is in Healy, Alaska, just north of Denali. And their entire economic system is being disrupted because right now they can't run their business like they used to, and it's been shortened significantly. And so that's just, I find that fascinating that in a matter of just a few years with some changes, you'll see that happen. The other thing is that one of my employees, actually daughter, lives in Alaska, and she's reported to us that the number of 80 and 90 degree days that they've experienced up in Alaska is breaking records right now. They've actually had days that hit 90 degrees in some of the cities that have never ever reached 90 degrees before. So things are changing, and it's hard to deny it, especially if you visit these places. A couple other things as we look at moose in Alaska. This is kind of their white-tailed deer of Alaska, is the moose. They are really being negatively impacted by this, as well as the caribou. So if you get in the Arctic and the tundra, caribou are really common. The problem they're experiencing is that the temperatures warm and stay warmer, more parasites, more diseases are setting in, as well as predation on these animals is actually increased due to the lack of snow and the adverse conditions. Some of the predators that commonly feed on these animals are more able to prey on them. So again, major changes happening there. I'll show you one other spot in Alaska before I move on. This is a place that I visited a few years ago. It's called Kotzebue, Alaska. It's up on the Bering Sea, right on the coast. And if you were to fly into it, this is what it looks like. And most of the native villages up in the Alaska area, they actually require that they kind of need these sand spits that are out in the ocean to build their homes on, because the tundra is frozen, and if you ever walk on the tundra, it is not really hospitable, and it's not great for building on. And so they tend to build on these sand spits, and for hundreds and hundreds of years, these different populations of native people have lived up there. And they've now started to have a pretty significant issue, because if you see, this is also Kotzebue, you can see all the water that's even on both sides of where they're living. What they're starting to experience is that they've lost several thousand feet of land as the tides or as the ocean levels are rising and their houses are falling in. There is a Shishmarif Inuit tribe that lives up there that I was able to visit, and they were sharing that they are actually thinking about packing up and moving altogether, because the place that they built their homes on and lived on for 100+ years is starting to go underwater and going away. So when people tell you that climate change isn't happening, these are images that I'm sharing with you of climate change actually happening, and it is impacting people. And sometimes when we sit here in Holland, Michigan, we may not see it. but it is happening, and it's happening at a pretty alarming rate. So these pictures I'm showing you here are pictures from, sorry, jumped around a little bit, of the tundra. The tundra is unique. There's no trees, and they're actually seeing it thaw. And as it thaws, it's releasing a lot of methane into the atmosphere, and that's another major issue that's creating more warming in places like Alaska, because the methane in the atmosphere is a greenhouse gas, and it's causing more warming up there. And again, the thawing of the tundra is exponentially creating more and more problems in this area. When we look at this from a regional perspective, there's a couple reports I'm going to reference here. One is from the Environmental Law Policy Center, and the other is from NOAA. But they have done a lot of investigating around our Great Lakes Basin. So let's bring this right here to our house here. The regional changes that we're seeing are pretty significant. This image, and I know it's a little blurry, but it serves its purpose. So the kind of the big area on the right side of the screen is actually Grand Rapids. And if you look to the bottom left corner, you see actually a dark kind of blob. That's actually Lake Makatawa. And the red on this screen is indicating development that has happened over the last about 20 years in the area. And the point that this is illustrating is that we are seeing continued urban growth and sprawl in areas. And when you take this and you look at it on a scale with how much, this is NOAA's graphics, but how much forest that we've lost about 250 square miles of forest. We've actually lost about 227 square miles of agriculture, and we've seen about 509 square miles of development increase. And these is actually some older numbers because they don't do these studies on a regular basis. The point I'm making is that we're seeing a pretty significant change. This graphic maybe shows it a little better. So the projected land use trends, this talks about farmland loss, but it actually illustrates built communities. So the red is where we have development, green is forest, the blue is water, the yellow is agriculture. And if you look at the, what it was in 1980 to what it is in 2020 to what they're projecting for 2040, what we're seeing is significant development. Now, I am not against development by any means because it's part of the foundation of our economy. But what we have to be concerned about is the impacts that occur in concert with that development and what the results of that can be. And I'm going to show you that now. So this graphic shows you rainfall through 2016 is when they did this graphic. But the darker the blue on the graphic, the more rainfall. Percent increases on the bottom there. So we've seen between 20 and 25% increase in rainfall. And that's very true. I have some other graphics I can show you on that. We've also seen the same trend here in the Great Lakes with our heat. So we've seen several degree temperature rises on average and mean temperatures rising. And so those things are really concerning. And the more we develop, the more we actually have to deal with stormwater when it does have increased rain. Where does that stormwater go? When we develop surfaces, when we pave surfaces, when we build buildings, they actually it creates almost an oven effect where the concrete and asphalt and buildings radiate more heat out. And at the same time, if we're removing trees, removing vegetation to do that, we are actually counteracting any ability that we have as a ecosystem to address the changes that are going on and to deal with it. And what that results in is this was actually Lake Erie about 4 years ago. This picture was taken. In 2011, it started with these kind of toxic blooms that they had, and they've gone on and off now for about a decade. And that's the green in that is actually algae growing in Lake Erie. Now, Lake Erie is one of the more shallow Great Lakes, and it has a lot of runoff from farmland going into it. And these algal blooms have been filled with blue-green algae, which is a type of cyanobacteria that is toxic. They actually have shut down the water systems for, different communities in and around Lake Erie because of this algal bloom. And it's there because there's so much runoff going into the lake. They've had warmer weather than normal. They've had more precipitation than normal, and it leads to these kind of issues. And so that's what we're seeing on a regional level. Now I'm going to just share it with you on a local level here. When we look at the local aspects of this, this is our watershed where we all live. On the left is what it looked like in the 1800s, and on the right is what it looked like in 2009. And again, this data doesn't get published every year, so I don't have a more up-to-date version yet. But you can see that on the right-hand side, red is the developed community, yellow is agriculture, green is forest, blue is water. And you can see the stark changes that have happened there. We've also seen our populations rise. And again, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. It's great that we have developing community, and we've had an economic system that's been pretty prosperous around here. But as we push all of these factors, increasing rain, increasing heat, increasing development, increasing the number of people, and these graphics are illustrating that, we end up with an aquatic system that is impaired. So this is an older picture, but this is what it used to look like at our pierhead at Holland State Park when the water would leave Lake Macatawa. It was very dirty, and it has improved quite a bit from what it used to be. This is what Lake Macatawa has looked like at times. Now, it has been since 2012 since we've had an algal bloom like this. This is actually an algae bloom. Now you'll see something like duckweed growing on the lake, which can look similar to this, but it is not an algal bloom. But we've not had a full-on algal bloom for about 8 years in Lake Macatawa. But this is a result of that development of pushing too much water down storm drains. And if you weren't aware, every one of our drains along the sidewalks and in parking lots, eventually that water runs out to Lake Macatawa or the Macatawa River. And that is just adding these nutrients to our systems. And when we look at what that impending impact is, you shove more water down a system, we see flooding, we see erosion along banks. Our system was not designed for it. So we haven't built a new drainage system, we have just added more water to it. And that has some pretty significant impacts. We also have seen from the agricultural perspective the impacts of this climatic changes. So in 2018, there were 6,000 acres of Macatawa watershed that went unfarmed because it was too wet and the seasonal conditions did not let them plant. Last year in 2019, between Allegan and Ottawa counties, there were 40,000 acres that went unfarmed. This year, we had a much drier spring and summer, and it was a much better. So that's a good thing. But as we see these trends for more moisture, it is going to impact more things than just flooding along the lake or along the river. It affects things like farming and food production. So where am I going with all this? Where do we go from here? But I want to try to talk to you about now is opportunity. So we can spend a lot of time looking at all these negative things that are going on. And the reason I share them with you is because I want you to set the tone that it is real, that it is happening, that we have documentation of temperatures rising, of water levels rising, of different atmospheric CO2 and methane and other things are increasing. We have documentation that it's affecting animals and people. So let's not sit and dwell on the fact that that is happening, because we know that it is. We tend to want to have arguments over this on political lines, and I would like us to focus on not having that argument on the political lines, but have that argument on the opportunity line, because we have some great opportunities in front of us. And if we can leverage the positives, we can actually start to make a difference. If we want to rely on government or somebody else to fix these problems, I'm sorry to say, but I think we're going to be here a long time waiting for that help to happen. I just want to share a couple things that I see as positive opportunities going on in our community. This is the same watershed map that I showed you earlier. And all the green land on this is all land that farmers have put into best management practice since Project Clarity started. This is a watershed initiative that we launched in 2012. About half our watershed farmland has been put into best management practice. These red dots indicate projects that have happened on farmland all over our watershed. And if you look at this graphic, what it's really illustrating you, and we don't have the 2019 updated on here yet, but what you can see is there's little gray lines underneath the green, yellow, and red lines. And what this is indicating is the amount of phosphorus in our water system, and the gray lines indicating the amount of rainfall. So what you're seeing here is since 2015, essentially, our rainfall has far exceeded the phosphorus level. And that is an absolutely exciting thing to be able to report, because if you're having more rain, you expect more runoff, and you'd expect more runoff would lead to more chemicals and nutrients getting into the water system. But we're actually seeing a decrease in the phosphorus levels in our system despite having increased rain. And in fact, Project Clarity and the Macatawa Greenway's conservation efforts And it's a collective group's efforts. We've had 400 acres of wetlands built, 2 miles of stream restored. The big thing I want to share is 70 farmers on 36,000 acres of farmland have implemented practices that have moved our phosphorus levels in Lake Macatawa to a 47-year low. They're about 47% below what they were in 2012. And why is that happening? Because we're seeing farmers adopt practices like these two pictures here. On the left is a field that was planted into a cover crop. So the farmer put a cover crop on the field, then he planted his crop, and that's how it came up. This is the exact same time frame, exact same area. These fields are actually across the street from each other. The farmer on the right did not use the conservation tillage, did not use cover crops, and because of the wetness of the soil, had a very hard time getting the crop going. You can see the difference here. Now, I'm sharing this with you because the conversation is critical. When we started in at Project Clarity, I was told by everybody it would never work. Farmers would never adopt practices. They were never going to change. These are pictures of farmers that have restored streams, restoring their fields. We have this group of people that have all worked on this project collectively. And I highlight the local agricultural producers because, again, everybody said farmers would not do things differently. And actually, we have seen farmers embrace this wholeheartedly. And we did that by not attacking them and telling them that they were the problem, telling them that they got to do things a different way. We addressed this by going to those farmers and saying, this is the issue that we see, and we need your help to fix it. What do you think could be done differently? How can we help leverage resources to support your work to make changes happen? And when we started to have that conversation, we started to have the positive, opportunistic conversation rather than the attacking, demanding, and kind of adversarial conversation. We actually started to see change happen throughout our watershed. And these things have continued around our community. I just have a few more examples for you here. 2 years ago, there was a House bill that was going to be passed that was going to remove a bunch of protections on our wetland systems. And we were part of a movement to write some letters and communicate with a couple of politicians, and we got the wording changed on that. It's positive stuff that's happened. We look at our power plant in our community. We were at a crossroads with how we could develop our power plant. We created a new one that has been far more environmentally friendly and sustainable. But even beyond that, there's about 20 acres of land all around this power plant that is now natural habitat, natural ecosystem with rain gardens and ponds. And we look at this whole energy park concept and what was created there. This is state-of-the-art stuff that's not being done really anywhere else. And we're doing it here in our community. That's something to hang our hat on and to embrace. Even down to how we have snow melt. Snow melt itself, you may say, well, that's not really an environmental thing. Well, it is if you're not putting salt on the streets, and that's just that much less salt washing into our system. It's innovation, it's thinking out of the box, and it's something that we need to do more of and learn how to have these conversations in a different way. Zeeland Public Schools last year purchased a couple electric buses. They have students now on their bus routes that are riding electric buses in Zeeland Public Schools. ODC here where I work, we actually have put in numerous solar panel systems around our facilities to the point now where you look at this, we're actually generating about 25% of our electric production here at ODC. And this week we're actually installing a fourth system, and it'll probably push us up to being close to half our energy production being created here by ODC Network at the Outdoor Discovery Center. And so when you look at all this, you say, well, why? Why does this matter? Why do we need to deal with it? And I would just respond to everybody with, this is your home. The economy, clean drinking water, clean air, biodiversity, food security, children's future, those are the things that are at stake. And this isn't meant to be a scare tactic thing. That's the reality. We're seeing it. I just shared all kinds of statistics with you and all kinds of images and pictures. The bottom line here, this isn't a political thing. We shouldn't be talking about it in a political way. And we have to stop talking about it in a way that attacks people. We have to start talking about it in a way that owns up to the fact that we are morally obligated as human beings to care for our planet. We are morally obligated when we know that something is wrong, when something is broke, that we help fix it. We do what we can to make it better. And that's what this conversation should be about. And if we could start to, as a community, embrace things in a different way and not go at it from a let's go and attack and yell and tell them they're not good enough, they're not doing enough, but rather have the conversation from, let's see what you could do better. Imagine the farmers, if we went to them and told them in Project Clarity, you're ruining our environment, you're terrible, you're horrible, you better fix what you're gonna do. The first thing they're gonna do is close the door and the conversation's over. But when you go to them and say, listen, we have some money, we have some resources, and we want you to help us do this, they step to the table and they help. What if we addressed every one of these conversations around climate change in that same way? Then our community that looks like this. These are some of the great assets that we have in our community. We want them to remain. We know that they're an important part of our community. We know that they need to be here. We know that it's what fulfills us as human beings. We also know that it is what helps sustain the quality of life that we have here. And in fact, Jennifer Owens, who's the head of Lakeshore Advantage, our economic development entity, she's even quoted in interviewing with employers, is that the number one thing, key asset to them to attract talent is the environment. It's what they're moving employees to. When you want people to come to a community, you want it to be this nature-rich community. And we need to really focus on that. This has an economic impact. This has health impacts to us, the quality of life components to it, as well as it's just long-term. And this is, I just thought I'd share this with you. This is our preschool that we run at the ODC Network. We've created an outdoor-based, nature-based preschool program. I share this picture right now with you because we run our program like this. Almost all of it is done outside with kids who are engaged in nature. And we are starting to see schools adopt this. One of the great things of being in a pandemic, that finding out that it's actually safer and better to be outside, we're seeing schools starting to embrace this and change is starting to happen. And I think that the more we can see that happen, the better it's going to be for everybody. So we need this to be the dawn of a new 100-year vision for who we are. It's no longer good enough just to be good, but we want to be great at what we do. And I'm going to leave you with this last thought. A study was just produced in Science News that showed that probably 50% of addressing climate issues could be done by preserving and protecting some key areas. And when you look at these maps, there's some globes on both of these. You'll see the pink areas on the map, if you can see that. By simply addressing those pink areas, stopping deforestation and protecting species in those areas, we could counteract potentially 50% of the issues with global climate change. That's a positive thing that we could do just by changing a few of our little practices. And so there is hope here. And the last thing I will share this too, is that when polled by that Environmental Law Policy Center, 70% of Americans believe that global warming and climate change is real. And in 2018, 88% of respondents to a binational poll, the Great Lakes Basin, they were concerned about this as well. So it's not like people don't care, people care. And when you can get 20, 30% people working on something, typically you can get there. If we have 88% of people interested in working on something, we can make it change. We just have to change how we're having the conversation. So what you can do is build on the positive opportunities, keep your cup half full, and if you can't seem to do that, I would recommend getting a smaller cup, because we have to try to stay on the positive side of this. Be a supporter, not a criticizer. If you want to go to somebody and talk to them about improving sustainability, improving the environment, don't do it in a way that attacks them and criticizes them because you've immediately closed the door. Do it in a way that embraces and engages them so that they can become part of the solution along with you and everybody else. We need to make sure we're educated, and I would ask that you be a leader. We need to focus on positive change. We don't need any more politicians. We don't need any more critics. We need more leaders right now. We need people who want to step up and try to tackle these problems. And then, so I hope that you as community members and engaged citizens can agree with me on this, is that it's time to change the conversation, and it's time to look at ourselves first and start to make small changes that can be exponentially turned into big changes in our world. And I will leave you again with the thought that words do matter. Make sure you are having the right conversation about the future of our planet and our community. And I threw two little quotes on there, and maybe one of them rings a bell with you, and you would like to live into it that way. But I hope that this was helpful. I hope that you gained a little bit from this. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer. And again, I encourage all of you to to think about how you can engage in positive change in our community.
Thank you, Travis. That was awesome. I am happy to take questions if anybody wants to chat them to me. I'll share them with Travis now. Also, I want to recognize 2 additional guests that we have this morning, Ben and Beth Baker. I believe you're on this morning, and we welcome you. And we hope you enjoyed the presentation this morning. We're happy to have you as guests and hope to have a chance to meet you in person sometime soon, but we're glad to have you with us. Does anyone have questions that they want to type into me? Share them with Travis. Just use your chat box. Okay, Travis, we have a question. What if continental shelves release their methane?
Well, and again, I'm not an expert in this area, so I'm going to be careful that I don't try to answer too deep of a question there. But I think any of these areas that are releasing gases out are going to cause, potential climatic impacts. And I think we as a society need to focus on the things that we can control, right? So I've always been a believer in worry about the things that you control and that you can impact, and there are certain things that are probably going to be out of your control. Shifting of continental shelves is not something I don't think anybody in this call is going to be able to control that and the impending results from that. But there are things that we do control, like planting a tree in your yard or whatever you can do to address those issues.
Great, thanks. Next, Travis, we have a thank you for your great information, and then a question regarding what do you hope to accomplish or work on serving on the Community Energy Plan Strategic Development Team?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I was appointed to the Community Energy Plan Strategic Development Team by Mayor Box, and our organization has spent a number of years really working to improve conservation and outdoor education efforts in the community. And I really feel like I can bring my knowledge and expertise and really my lived experiences to that group. And I would hope that we can begin to build a plan that encompasses action in a variety of areas around the community. And I think we need to have 5 or 6, maybe more, actual action things going on to helping address and change what's going on in our community with how energy is being used, but also how we conserve and protect spaces. So I'm just really excited to be part of that decision-making process and guiding process, and hopefully more of what we're doing here at the ODC Network can be reflected out into our community.
Thank you. Question from Priscilla. Yes, we are recording this session, so you'll be able to find it on the HASP YouTube channel later today. So feel free to share that with whoever you would like. A question regarding, is there curriculum available for families teaching their children at home during COVID? Travis, do you have any recommendations about that?
Yeah, so I don't know if there's any specific curriculum for that. One of the things that we have done as an organization is we recently hired a nature-rich manager for our organization, and it's actually somebody with global sustainability corporate experience. And they're paired with our education team, and we're putting together an entire education program for the city of Holland. That was announced in the paper about a week or so ago, but we're going to be taking a much stronger effort in this area. So I think that you will see some of that being developed over time. We do have some modules and some components that have been created that we're using with some of our distance and remote learning programs that we're helping manage. So we have students that are coming to ODC from the virtual classes to have some in-person outdoor time right now, and we've created some environmental modules that go along with that. And again, we're going to continue to build more and more of this over time. So it's a good question. We need more of it. I don't have a lot of it yet, but it will be coming.
Wonderful. Question, what solar installer did you use, Travis, out at the ODC?
So the company that we've primarily used or we've been engaged with is called Helios Solar, and they're out of the Kalamazoo area. And Helios is a pretty well-known, they've done a lot of stuff for some of the automotive industry, covering the rooftops of their buildings with solar, and we've been really impressed with them. We have 4 20-kilowatt solar panel systems wired into different buildings here and part of the net metering program. So when we produce more electricity than we use, we sell it back. And when we're producing and we're using at the same time, there's a net offset that happens there.
Okay. Another question, what sources would you suggest we monitor regularly to stay informed and to learn of education and volunteer opportunities?
Yeah, so locally, I would say there's 2 or 3 things that I would probably latch on to. One is the work of the Project Clarity and Macatawa Watershed. We're really working hard on our water quality and water issues, and the results that we see in the lake. The lake is kind of the symptom to the problems that are happening elsewhere. So as we work to improve that, we're addressing a lot of issues. And I would stay engaged in that, and there are opportunities there. The other areas that there's growing interest in, I would say, is the community energy plan that was referenced a little bit ago. That's something that you could be engaged with and helping organizations like mine to continue to work at bettering our community in that respect. And then I would say that there are a lot of conservation and education efforts that are going on around air quality, recycling, composting. There's a lot of really, really smart and talented people in our community doing that work. I'd be happy to try to, make connections. If people are looking for them, they can reach out to our organization, and we probably can help connect with some of these other people.
Okay, thanks. Another question is if the, hold on, sorry. Can you comment on the contribution of diet to climate change, for example, deforestation for cattle ranching?
Yeah, so that's a big deal, and it's not only a big, it's driven by diet. I'm going to be careful here. I'm going to be clear with everybody. I am not an expert on all these topics. I have an inch deep of knowledge, and maybe it's a half a mile wide. But there's been some great examples of how overgrazing and deforestation impacts the environment. There's a gentleman actually he was one of the co-founders of Church's Chicken, and multimillionaire. He sold the company, I think it's Jefferson, Texas. He bought, when he sold the company, made his millions, he went out and purchased the most degraded tract of land that he could find. And it was overgrazed by cattle. It had just scrub on it. It had lost its biodiversity essentially. And he started in on the process of removing some of the invasive stuff, some of the scrubby material that had kind of filled in, and started to plant native grasses, native flowers, native plants. This particular tract of land, there was no water on it, none. They couldn't get it. They dug 500-foot deep wells and came up dry. After about 10, 15 years of doing that, and you can Google this, there's a whole story and they interview the guy, but the land started to just change as the plants grew in, as the vegetation changed. Water began to emerge, because the root systems will funnel water and collect water and increase moisture. So just so many positive things can come when we don't over impair the land. And I do think even in Ecuador, I've seen where they harvest rainforest to replace it with farmland. And the soil, unfortunately, is very poor in the rainforest as well. You'd think it wouldn't be, but it is super poor quality soil, and it doesn't grow much. But when people are forced to make decisions of trying to make a living, to feed their family, sometimes these decisions lead to these kind of unintended consequences. And I think the cattle industry is one of those that, the overgrazing has a pretty significant impact. And then the animals have been shown to produce a lot of methane. And, so there's a cycle that goes on there that, the diet that we as Americans and as probably, in the world does impact our climate. And that maybe is the story.
Thank you. A question regarding what efforts could be made to bring about sustainability change in those pink colored areas.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing there, I think, and something that I'd like to see us focus on even more in our own community here is the forestation aspect. So when we have trees, we have a shading effect of it, which helps cool the area. We have the vegetation, which helps absorb the CO2. They're amazing filters of water. Trees absorb thousands and thousands of gallons of water and hold that water. There's so many mitigating effects that can come from having forest or having trees planted. I really want to see us as a community locally, but I think, nationally, globally, is we could put more effort into restoring and protecting natural spaces. Less mowed lawn grass, less developed areas. When we put in a parking lot, let's put some trees in the parking lot. When we build buildings, let's have some landscaping with trees around it. We tend to avoid those. School playgrounds are this way too. We tend to avoid them because we don't want to deal with the leaves. But the repercussions of not doing that, it far outweighs the fact that you might have to pick up some leaves. And heaven forbid, if you're a school, you maybe just invest in a half a dozen rakes and let the kids rake them into leaves into a pile and play in them, right? There are solutions to this that are pretty simple, but the nearsightedness of our decision making sometimes leads to bigger issues. I'm all about the tree planting, the habitat restoration. It's been proven to be a cheaper solution than some of the built solutions that are out there. Maldives, the islands of Maldives, they are restoring their coral reefs by planting new coral reef, and they found that it's like 20% of the cost of building seawalls, and it's just as effective. We need to do more thinking like that.
Okay, related to that, I'll try to make this the last question. It's related to Holland and the Community Energy Development Team. Part A is, can you attach a price tag to all of the recommendations and whether or not that's possible? And secondly, is there, or what could be done to move up the timeline, to step up the timeline for this project?
Yeah, two good questions. I don't know if I have good answers for them, so I'll admit that. I do believe you could probably put a price tag on a lot of it, and it would be developing a plan that I don't think exists at the moment that we would need to really, dive into what needs to be done here on a local scale. And I think the timeline is driven by us as people. If you want to sit back and wait for somebody else to do it, the timeline is going to be a lot longer. If we start doing things ourselves, if we start making investments ourselves, I think we can shorten that timeline. And what I mean by that is not go yell at somebody else and tell them they should do something, but if we actually ourselves start doing things. So, and again, I go back to the planting the tree and native landscaping and all these different factors of things that we can work on. Just how we deal with water that runs off properties we own, or for a builder, how we build the property, or for a city planner, how we go about our planning processes. If you're on city council, how do you make decisions for how many trees need to go on a piece of property, or how stormwater is handled? These all boil down to be individualized decisions that people can make. And the more we start to address those on an individualized level, and then find like-minded people that want to work with us to continue to exponentially grow that, the more that we're going to see change happen. And that can happen as quickly as we're willing to work together. And so that's why I go back to my whole comment of this whole presentation is words matter. If you're going to show up at City Hall or somewhere else and just tell people they're doing a bad job, you're probably going to get ears shut down to what you're saying. But if we go into and we embrace people for what they're doing and they're trying to do, we honor them for the big things that they have done, and we encourage them to do more, and we do that same thing to ourselves, I think we can see change on a much quicker basis.
Thanks, Travis. I love that tip. It reminds me, in the last couple of years, I've finally learned when people come to me with a complaint, I usually try to say, thank you for sharing that. Do you have a recommended solution?
Yes.
Yes. So put it back on them. Yep. Very good. Last question. Do you know what the future expectations are for that capped field to the east of the MSU building, the old Pfizer plant? Any idea what's happening there?
Well, I can give you maybe I'm 2 inches deep on this one, but so that particular area, as you just alluded to, was capped and covered with several feet of soil. There are numerous monitoring wells that Pfizer is obligated to continue to monitor and kind of maintain oversight on for many years to come. It wasn't just a hall pass for them to get away. That site cannot really have anything built down into it, so there's no like deep foundations or anything can be put into it. So it has a relatively specific set of uses that could happen there. And there is conversations going on with the City of Holland, with Holland Township. I'm trying to think of all the players I've seen at the table. A lot of our developers in the community have been having conversations with Pfizer about would they be willing to donate it, sell it? What would that be? There's discussions, no decisions being made that I'm aware of, but discussions about what kind of uses could happen on it. Our organization was even interested in it, and that we could turn it into a park or something along the waterfront. There's got to be a use for it, but it's going to be very specific because of the contaminants that are under the ground, the lack of development that can happen on parts of it, and the fact that it's just its location too it's got some uniqueness to it. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen there. Pfizer is not, being a big global conglomerate company like that. It's not easy to have these conversations with them, but we're working on it, and there's people smarter than I working on it too. So we hope to see something probably in the next year. I would say to 2 years, maybe there will be some kind of a plan that comes out.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, it's 10:45, so I feel obligated to let Travis go if he needs to go do other things, and everyone else as well. But a reminder that next month we'll be hearing from Scott Tucker, who is the superintendent of Sleeping Bear Dunes. The 50th anniversary of that park is our speaker for October. So we look forward to seeing some of you then. Awesome job this morning, Travis. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm going to leave the Zoom meeting open for a little bit so that you can see the other comments to you, thanking you for your presentation this morning. This is a great kickoff to our focus this fall on sustainability. We hope to see many of you in those courses. And again, thanks for being here. Bye, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Travis, are you able to see the other things in the chat?
Yeah, I just
Okay.
saved the file.
Okay, awesome. Okay.
I'll look at that, and if I know anybody in there, I can respond to them too.
Okay, yeah, there was one person, Priscilla Brink, I think, wondered about if you would do something like this for a church group.
Yep. And if anybody asks that, yeah, I'd be happy to consider, whatever. So.
Okay. Great.
Awesome.
I'm gonna stop the recording, but if you can stay on otherwise.
I'm going to stay on for a little bit because I'll wait and see if any more comments come in, and I'll resave that file just so I
Okay,
can
great.
evaluate. I didn't get a chance to read